The Yellow Raincoat. I moved into the apartment on the corner of Hawthorne Street in late spring, drawn by the quiet, almost oppressive calm that seemed to hang in the air. The building was old and brick-streaked, with a faint smell of mildew that never quite left. On my first evening, as I unpacked, I caught a flicker of yellow in the corner of my eye, a flash against the otherwise muted gray of the street. At first, I assumed it was a car's reflection or a stray raincoat, but when I turned, there was nothing. The next night, the yellow returned. Across the street, under a flickering lamp that hummed with electricity, a figure stood still. The raincoat was bright, almost glowing in the darkness, but the person's face was hidden beneath the hood. I told myself it was a neighbor, someone returning from a late shift, perhaps lost in thought. Still, when I stepped to the window, no one was there. Over the following week, the appearances became a pattern. The yellow raincoat always emerged around the same time and in the same spot. I tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but the street was empty at night, except for me. I began double-checking locks, peering through blinds, even leaving the apartment only when I felt it was safe. The tension grew like a weight pressing down on my chest. One night, I stepped outside, heart hammering, just to see if I could confront the figure. The street was deserted. I walked slowly, scanning every shadow, every reflection. There was nothing. But when I returned, a small scrap of paper was wedged under my door. On it, in jagged, deliberate handwriting, were two words: "I see." My hands shook as I read them, disbelief mixing with fear. The following nights were worse. I began noticing the raincoat reflected in surfaces it shouldn't have been: mirrors, windows, the shiny surface of my refrigerator. I would spin around, expecting to find someone there, only to face emptiness. Even my cat, normally indifferent, hissed and arched its back at corners of the room where nothing stood. The tension became unbearable. I tried leaving the apartment, taking long walks, hoping it was harmless. But the yellow raincoat appeared again, always closer, always silent. Once, I turned a corner into an alley, and there it was, standing beneath a broken street lamp, glinting as though it had been waiting for me. I forced my legs to move, striding past, refusing to look back. I stopped sleeping. Nights became bursts of terror and half-awake dread. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of electricity, every distant car made me tense. The raincoat became a symbol of dread. I could feel it even when it wasn't there. One night, I woke to soft footsteps outside my bedroom window. I froze. Through the thin glass, I saw the glint of yellow beneath the streetlight. My breath caught. It was closer than ever. My instincts screamed to run, but I couldn't move. The notes continued, appearing in different ways, slipped under the door, placed on the windowsill, sometimes just visible through the reflection in the mirror. Always the same words, sometimes written larger, sometimes smaller. "I see you." Each time, my skin prickled with panic. I began noticing the smallest things: the rustle of fabric in a breeze, shadows that lingered longer than natural, shapes at the edge of my vision. The raincoat had become a part of my life. Its presence infiltrated my thoughts, my routines, my sleep. One night, I decided I couldn't live like this. I would confront it. I stepped into the street, shoulders squared, heart hammering. The street was empty. I called out, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a subtle shimmer of yellow beneath the flickering lamp. I approached cautiously. Nothing. No footprints, no sound. Just the glint of fabric that wasn't meant to be there. I stood for what felt like hours, waiting, eyes straining, until exhaustion forced me back inside. After that night, the appearances became irregular. Weeks would pass with no sign. Then suddenly the flash of yellow would return. Even in daylight, shadows seemed longer than they should be. Reflections sharper, corners darker. The feeling of being watched never left. I began keeping a journal, writing down every sighting, every note, every reflection. The more I documented, the more I realized that the yellow raincoat had become a part of me. It didn't need to act. Its presence was enough. Months later, I woke to silence, the streets washed in the gray of early morning. No footsteps, no rustle, no flash of yellow. I allowed myself to breathe. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I catch a glint in the corner of my eye, a reflection in the window, a shimmer under the street lamp. And I know, somewhere out there, the yellow raincoat still watches. Always watching. Red curtains, empty room. When I first moved into the apartment on Crestwood Avenue, I thought the red curtains in the living room were beautiful, vivid, dramatic, almost alive against the pale walls. At night, though, they seemed to move on their own, swaying slightly, even when the windows were shut. The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was subtle. A shadow stretched across the floor behind the curtains. I blinked, convinced it was a trick of the streetlight outside. But when I approached, the room was empty. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of electricity felt amplified. The red curtains drew my attention constantly, a subtle unease gnawing at the edges of my mind. Over the next few days, I started noticing small, unsettling things. Objects would be slightly out of place when I returned home. A chair angled differently. A book on the table shifted. At first, I chalked it up to absent-mindedness. But then I saw it. A figure, faint and indistinct, reflected in the darkened window glass behind the red curtains. I turned quickly. Nothing. The room was empty, the curtains still. My heart pounded. I stopped walking into the living room at night. I found myself checking corners, scanning shadows, my imagination running wild. And yet, every evening, the curtains swayed ever so slightly, as if responding to something unseen. One morning, I woke to find the curtains drawn completely open. I hadn't touched them. Sunlight spilled into the room, but it couldn't wash away the feeling that someone had been there, watching. I installed a small camera, just to be sure. At first, nothing appeared on the footage. Then, one night, the curtains flickered. A shadow moved behind them, too fast to identify. It vanished the instant I checked the recording. The unease grew. I began avoiding the living room entirely after dark, eating in the kitchen, sleeping with the lights on. Every sound dripping faucets, distant traffic seemed magnified, carrying a weight of menace I couldn't explain. I started hearing whispers. Not words, just murmurs that seemed to come from behind the curtains. I froze each time, straining to catch them, but they always stopped the moment I focused. One night, I forced myself to enter the room, flashlight in hand. The red curtains rippled as if a breeze passed through them. There was no wind. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, though no one was there. I noticed something odd on the windowsill. A faint outline, like a handprint, though the glass had been clean. My skin crawled as I ran my fingers over it, but it vanished as soon as I touched it. Sleep became impossible. I began seeing the outline of a figure in my peripheral vision. Whenever I turned to look, nothing was there, just the curtains swaying faintly. I tried reasoning with myself. Old building, shadows, imagination. But the fear wasn't imaginary. It pressed against my chest, quickened my heartbeat, made my skin prickle constantly. I stopped leaving the apartment after dark. I began eating meals at my desk, watching the curtains out of the corner of my eye. They moved sometimes, subtly, teasing me, daring me to look. A week later, I woke to a chill. The red curtains were drawn tight. I didn't touch them, but the outline of a person was pressed faintly against the fabric. I froze, paralyzed by a terror I couldn't name. I called a friend, pretending to joke about the curtains. They laughed, told me I was imagining things. I didn't tell them about the handprints, the shadows, the whispers. I couldn't. That night, I dreamed of the room. The curtains fell away, revealing the empty apartment stretching endlessly, and a figure at the far wall, waiting. I woke in a cold sweat, convinced the dream had been a warning. I stopped moving the curtains altogether, letting them hang motionless. Even then, I felt eyes on me, even in the daytime, even when no one could be there. The camera caught a faint movement once, a blur behind the curtains, almost human in shape, but distorted. I stared at the footage until my eyes ached, then deleted it in frustration. I began hearing footsteps on the hardwood behind the curtains, slow and deliberate, though no one had entered. My apartment felt smaller, claustrophobic, a trap I couldn't escape. I tried to cover the windows, drape the curtains with sheets, but nothing changed. The presence was not outside. It was inside, or at least it knew the space intimately. I stopped looking directly at the curtains. I only glanced from the corners of my eyes. They swayed, always responding, as if teasing me, as if aware of my fear. A note appeared on my kitchen counter one morning. "I like your red curtains." I didn't move it. I couldn't. My hands shook. The whispers returned, now more distinct. Words I couldn't make out, carried in the faint rustling of fabric. I sat silently, pretending not to hear, knowing it was futile. Sleep was impossible. I began staying awake all night, watching the room, heart racing with every sound, every movement behind the curtains. One night, I edged closer, reaching a trembling hand toward the red fabric. It shifted suddenly, revealing nothing, yet I felt a cold gaze pierce through me. I spent weeks in that apartment, like a prisoner of my own fear, existing in a state of heightened dread. The curtains were alive in some inexplicable way, a barrier between me and something I didn't want to see. Finally, I moved. I packed quickly, leaving behind furniture, lamps, and the cursed red curtains. I didn't look back as I left the apartment for the last time. But sometimes in the dreams that follow me, the red curtains sway gently, and I feel the weight of unseen eyes. Even far away, I know they watch, and I know that empty room waits, patient and silent. The vanishing figure. It started with glimpses in the hallway, brief flashes at the edge of my vision. I would turn, expecting to see someone, anyone, and the space would be empty. Only the faint echo of footsteps remained. The first time it happened, I thought it was fatigue, a trick of the late-night hours. But then it became a pattern, always the same fleeting figure, appearing for a heartbeat before disappearing entirely. I began noticing it in reflections too. In the darkened windows of neighboring apartments, the figure would appear for a second, then vanish before I could fully comprehend what I saw. At first, I told myself it was a neighbor, someone hurrying home. But no one ever emerged from the shadows. No doors opened. The street remained empty, still and silent, except for the faintest whisper of movement. I tried to follow it once. My footsteps quickened, my pulse racing, but the figure would vanish the moment I neared, as if it existed only to tease and unsettle. Days passed, and my fear grew. I began avoiding the areas where I had seen it most often. Hallways, stairwells, alleyways, all felt unsafe, as though the figure had clung to. It wasn't malevolent. At least, I couldn't tell if it was. It simply appeared, observed, and vanished. But its presence was enough to unnerve me, to make my blood run cold with each fleeting glimpse. I started documenting every appearance. I scribbled notes in a small notebook, desperate to find a pattern, desperate to understand what I was dealing with. Yet each entry only made the figure more mysterious. One evening, I waited in the hallway, determined to confront it. My hands trembled, my breath shallow. I glimpsed it, pale and indistinct, like smoke in the dim light, and stepped forward. It was gone. The next day, neighbors mentioned a man who had lived here before, someone who disappeared without explanation. The description was vague, but it sent a chill down my spine. Could it be connected to what I was seeing? I began noticing small changes in my apartment, subtle signs of presence. A chair slightly moved, a shadow lingering where it shouldn't. The figure wasn't confined to the hallways. It followed me, almost imperceptibly. Sleep became a rare luxury. Each night, I lay awake, imagining the figure appearing at the edge of my bed, vanishing before I could scream. I refused to close my eyes completely, fearing the shadows that moved just beyond vision. I spoke to a friend about it, cautiously, framing it as paranoia. They laughed it off, but I could see doubt flicker in their eyes. Maybe they had glimpsed it too, or maybe they were just being polite. I started carrying a flashlight everywhere, even in my apartment. Shadows became elongated, strange angles distorted reality, and the figure always appeared just out of reach. I began to feel trapped in my own home. Notes started appearing, like breadcrumbs in a trail I couldn't follow. "Watch closer," one read. "Don't look away," said another. I didn't leave them. Couldn't, though I didn't place them there myself. I began to notice the figure in photographs. Snapped casually, the hallway in the background revealed a vague silhouette. On the instant I raised the camera again. My fear was compounded by disbelief. I had proof, yet proof eluded explanation. Walking down the street, I would catch the figure at the periphery of my vision. People passed, unaware, oblivious. The figure seemed to exist outside their perception, tethered only to me, invisible to the world. It became impossible to concentrate, to work, to eat properly. Each time I entered a hallway, I flinched, expecting to see the familiar blur, the fleeting observer who had made my life a string of tense anticipation. One night, I set up cameras, hoping to capture it fully. The footage revealed nothing at first, but then, a pale shape flickered across the hall, vanishing into thin air. My hands shook as I watched, heart pounding, mind reeling. I tried reasoning with myself. Perhaps it was a trick of light, shadows playing on my eyes, a neurological glitch. But the consistency, the patterns, the subtle signs left no room for rational explanation. The vanishing figure wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. It didn't attack, it didn't speak. But its presence invaded everything: sleep, work, thought, movement, until I felt my life had been reduced to mere survival in its unseen gaze. Weeks passed. I considered moving, leaving the apartment behind. But even imagining leaving, I could feel it in my peripheral vision, waiting, lingering, ensuring that distance alone might not free me from its watch. I began leaving my doors slightly ajar, trying to trick it, test it, see how it would respond. Sometimes it lingered near the opening, sometimes it vanished entirely, but the feeling of being observed never dissipated. Even in daylight, the figure's presence was palpable. Reflections in glass, flickers in passing car windows, even shadows cast by trees seemed connected. I was never truly alone. I stopped speaking about it to most people. Only a few knew, and even they didn't understand. Some thought I was exaggerating. Others feared my growing paranoia. I couldn't risk it being seen as delusion. The notes continued, cryptic and brief. Closer, not yet, watch. Each one heightened the tension, and I began to wonder if it had a plan, or if it existed solely to torment. I began sleeping with the lights on, doors locked, curtains drawn. Still, I would see it, for a second, at the edge of vision, vanishing before I could turn my head fully. Eventually, I accepted it. The vanishing figure would always exist, just out of reach, just beyond understanding. I learned to live with it in a state of quiet vigilance, never daring to relax completely. I moved temporarily to a friend's apartment. The figure did not appear. Relief flooded me, but unease lingered. Even far away, I could feel it, a tether connecting me to something unseen an observer who refused to let go. Months later, I returned briefly to collect belongings. The hallway was empty, silent, yet familiar. I glanced to the side, and for a moment, I thought I saw it a pale, fleeting blur, but it vanished before I could process it. I left quickly, carrying the memory with me. Even now, in my new apartment, shadows feel heavier at the edge of my vision, reflections fleetingly distorted. The vanishing figure remains, a constant reminder that some presences cannot be escaped. A silent stalker, it began with the feeling, subtle at first, that I wasn't alone. I would walk down quiet streets at night, and a chill would crawl up my spine, as if unseen eyes followed every step. The first time I noticed it clearly, I was leaving work late. A figure trailed me several paces behind, silent, careful, perfectly still whenever I glanced back. I convinced myself it was coincidence. But the coincidences multiplied. Every night, the feeling of being followed intensified. Shadows shifted unnaturally in my peripheral vision, and streetlights cast odd, elongated shapes that seemed too deliberate to be random. At home, I felt it even more. Footsteps outside my apartment, faint but deliberate, echoed in the hallways. When I looked through the peephole, no one was there. Only the silence, heavier than usual. I began double-checking locks obsessively, scanning windows and doors, feeling like a rat trapped in a maze. The figure never made a sound, never approached directly, but the presence was undeniable. One evening, I left the building early, trying to test if the stalker would appear. Halfway down the street, I sensed it. I looked back, a shadow melted into the lamplight and disappeared, leaving only the faintest rustle. I started keeping track of patterns, times, routes, places I visited. The figure seemed to appear randomly, yet always at the edge of awareness. I became hyper-aware of every movement, every sound, every flicker of light. Sleep became impossible. I would lie awake, listening for steps, every distant noise sending my heart racing. Shadows seemed to move independently, stretching longer, bending unnaturally, as if mocking me. I tried to rationalize it. A neighbor? Someone with nothing better to do? But rationality offered no comfort. The figure's appearances were too precise, too unnerving, too impossible to ignore. One night, I left the lights on and sat in the living room, waiting. Around midnight, I heard it. Soft, deliberate steps along the corridor. I held my breath, straining to see through the darkness. The figure paused, then vanished. The next day, a note appeared on my doorstep. Just 2 words, "I follow." My hands trembled as I picked it up. I hadn't heard anyone enter or leave. The handwriting was neat, almost clinical, and filled me with dread. I began varying my routine, hoping to confuse it, to shake its vigilance. I took longer routes home, ran errands at different hours. It didn't matter. The presence remained, always patient, always silent. Even in crowded spaces, I felt it. Standing in line at the store, walking through the subway, I caught glimpses at the edge of my vision. Shadows that didn't belong. Movements that stopped when I looked directly. I stopped using my front door for weeks. Back entrances, alleyways, stairwells, none were safe. Every path seemed under scrutiny, every route calculated. My life had become a series of cautious movements, designed to avoid being observed. The sound of my own heartbeat was deafening. Every floorboard, every metal grate, every echo became suspect. I imagined the figure waiting in the corners, analyzing, anticipating, patient beyond reason. I spoke to a friend, attempting humor. "I think someone's following me," I said lightly. Their laughter made me feel guilty for feeling fear. But deep down, I knew the presence was real, undeniable, and growing stronger in its silence. The notes continued. "Watch carefully. Don't turn. Soon." The brevity and clarity terrified me more than anything else. The figure didn't need to act aggressively. The mere knowledge that it was there was enough to make me afraid. I installed cameras around my apartment, hoping for proof, for reassurance. The recordings were inconclusive. Shadows flickered, shapes blurred, but nothing solid. The evidence taunted me proof existed, yet I couldn't grasp it fully. I began checking reflections obsessively. Windows, mirrors, shiny appliances, all surfaces became portals to something lurking just out of reach. Every reflection carried the possibility of seeing the figure standing behind me. One night, I awoke to a soft tap at the window. I froze, convinced it was outside. When I looked, there was nothing, but a sense of observation remained, as if invisible eyes were pressing through the glass. I stopped going out at night entirely. Every step, every movement outside became unbearable. I felt trapped in my own home, a prisoner of a stalker who existed solely to instill fear, never to act openly. The figure's patience was a torment. I began hearing subtle cues that it was closer than ever. The scrape of shoes on concrete, the creak of hallway doors, the faint echo of breath that wasn't mine. I tried leaving notes for whoever or whatever it was. Warnings, pleas, attempts at communication. None were answered. The silence mocked me, broken only by the occasional cryptic message left in impossible ways. I began sleeping in shifts, never lying down for long, always half awake. Dreams merged with reality, and I couldn't distinguish whether footsteps were real or imagined. Every attempt at normalcy failed. Grocery trips, visits to friends, even a simple walk in the park, everywhere the figure's presence lurked just out of view. I became hyper-aware of every reflection, every shadow, every movement at the edge of perception. I even tried leaving the city. Weeks away offered temporary relief, but the sense of being watched lingered. It was not bound by proximity. It existed beyond distance, a shadow tethered to me. I started locking windows and doors obsessively, yet still felt eyes on me indoors. The apartment felt smaller, suffocating, every room a cage watched by an invisible observer. Finally, I accepted it. The silent stalker existed as a constant, patient, immovable force. It didn't need to attack, didn't need to speak. It was enough that it was there, watching, always. Even now, years later, I feel it. In unfamiliar hallways, quiet streets, dimly lit rooms. The fear is ingrained, the vigilance automatic. I am never alone, and the silent stalker ensures I never forget it.